It's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis, this is Red Eye Radio.
And good morning to you, good evening to you, and welcome on in to another edition of Red Eye Radio, the last one for 2025. As a matter of fact, it is, I want to make sure, it's New Year's Eve morning. That's what it is, New Year's Eve morning, December 31st, and we have a lot to talk about this morning. One of the things in the news, I'm just going to rattle off a couple of headlines, but I've got so much this morning, I just don't want to waste any time. Did Vladimir Zelensky bomb Vladimir Putin's home? So that is one of the big stories that is breaking this morning. I will be honest with you. I haven't really been covering Zelensky going to the White House and Donald Trump's phone call with Vladimir Putin because these things, these meetings, these conversations I saw that Donald Trump said, had a great conversation with Vladimir Putin. Nothing ever happens. So I haven't really covered that much here on Red Eye Radio. Also, tomorrow, Zoran Mamdani is going to be sworn in as the mayor of New York, so we'll talk about that as well. There is a lot going on, believe it or not. I know, shocking. There is also some updates on the Somali fraud story. We'll get into that as well. Just a lot going on. One of my favorite stories, though, to talk about tonight. I will get to it. Again, as I said, I have got a lot of stories. But one of the big stories that I have this morning is the real story behind Ilhan Omar and her ties to something called the Hargeisa Holocaust. We are going to talk about that because she has always said that, she is, an innocent victim of the civil war in Somalia. Well, they've done some investigating, and it looks like she actually is not an innocent victim, if you will, of the civil war in Somalia. It turns out that her father was actually one of the main perpetrators of what many call a genocide in Somalia. So we are going to talk about that. And, of course, I know that you'll be shocked to hear that the possibility that she married her brother will also come up in that conversation. So you miss a little, you miss a lot. Welcome on in to Red Eye Radio. Again, the last show for the year of 2025. By the way, I will have the day off tomorrow, Thursday, and then we are back on Friday. And then Gary and Eric, they will return in the new year. So last time we spoke about Nick Shirley. Of course, you know Nick, the guy who blew the Somali fraud case wide open with his videos there in Minnesota. Well, unfortunately, now he says that he is receiving death threats.
There's, people are so upset, there's, bounties on me here in Minnesota because people are so upset as far as the fraud that's being exposed because they know their time's up and they know everyone's just sick and tired of this happening inside their own state and across America.
What have some of those threats been?
Yeah, there was apparently a bolo that they used. That's the word that some people told me was on me. And I can't reveal too much just because I don't want to reveal. But lots of messages, death threats, obviously, on social media. And then it's just not the most safe thing for me to be moving around freely right now.
All right, so a bolo is a be on the lookout in cop talk. So if I'm reading his words, he is saying that someone specific is making some very specific threats. Now, remember what his partner in all of this, David, had said, that the Somalians are very violent people. Follow me on X, at Dan Mandis Show. There is a video that is up there that I'm going to reference here in a few minutes that you have got to see. But, it could be anyone that is threatening Nick Shirley. It could be a Somali. It could simply be a Democrat operative that wants to take him out. We don't know. It could be just some psycho. But here's the thing, is that in the age of Charlie Kirk's assassination, and I know that Nick Shirley has to be thinking about this, in the age of Charlie Kirk's assassination and the resulting celebration from the left, And don't forget the embracement of this assassination culture that the left has also embraced, where, you can take somebody out, you can justify taking somebody out if it is politically expedient. Any threats on Nick Shirley's life, it's got to be taken seriously. Some people are saying that he needs Secret Service protection, as a matter of fact. That is a conversation that is going online. Also, don't forget, we had 2 assassination attempts on President Trump. Of course, Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO, he was assassinated. He was murdered as well. So if Nick Shirley is getting threats on his life, this is something that does need to be taken seriously. Now, listen to this. Now that the Somalis know Nick and who he is and what he is doing, he is in Minnesota still, and he is looking for a place called Advanced Mobility. This is the video that I was telling you about. Find it on my X. He walks into this Somali building, right? And he's looking for a facility called Advanced Mobility. It's probably some sort of a fake healthcare agency that is getting, money from the government, but it doesn't really exist. Fraud. We've seen this over and over again. But I want you to listen to this. He walks in. He and David walk in. They know exactly who he is, and they almost get physical. They threaten him, and they chase him out.
Where's the advanced mobility at? That's all we're asking.
Get the out of here, man. Out! Move. Did you grow up here? Why do you care? I was born in Minneapolis. You're telling me to go to the White House.
Yeah, that is, of course, David, the guy that is with Nick Shirley. And the Somali said, get out of here and go to white places. Literally, that's what he said. Go to white places.
I grew up here.
You're telling us to go to white.
What? White business. Are you a racist? Are you a racist? God is this.
Yeah, so now the good news, I suppose, for Nick, you've got to go see the video on my X feed at Dan Mandis Show, because it gets, really close to violent. Really close to violent. And by the way, Nick Shirley, he has found himself in that position often. He has been doing this kind of work for a long time, and there's a lot of planning and a lot of effort and a lot of risk that goes into it. And so the good news for Nick, I suppose, his YouTube channel just now got over 1 million subscribers. Now, that is awesome, but the question is, will he be able to continue to do what he does safely moving forward? Now, I do hope so, because we do need voices and activists like Nick Shirley out there doing the work that clearly the media won't. But Nick Shirley's partner in Minnesota, again, David, he has now filed a formal criminal complaint against Tim Walz.
I filed a formal criminal complaint against Tim Walz for violating Minnesota Statute 3.971, Subdivision 9. So there's an investigation ongoing, and I think Tim's going to have a bad day, and he deserves it, because he allowed this fraud, because he wanted the voting bloc that the Somalis represent, because they all vote in a bloc, and it's 100,000, 150,000, who knows how many.
Right, and so you can't win Minnesota without winning Minneapolis, and you can't win Minneapolis without sucking up to the Somalis. That's the bottom line. So, people wonder, how do they get away with all of this? Well, it's because, the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, and Tim Walz, and, everybody else involved in this, they didn't want to tick off the Somalis, because that would mean that they would lose power. And so they would rather rip off the taxpayers than hold the Somalis accountable and stop the fraud. And by the way, David, the charges that he has filed, formal criminal complaint, the statute is called Obligation to Notify the Legislative Auditor. That's a quote, which means that the governor was obligated to notify the state's auditor when they discover fraud. Now, I don't believe that Tim Walz did this. Maybe he did and nobody knows about it, whatever. But that is what David is doing. But from what I can tell, there is actually no penalty written for those who break this obligation. It's almost like it's more of a guideline than an actual law. I don't know, whatever. But the investigations into Minnesota, into Minneapolis, into the Somalis, they are racking up. You have the FBI, and we've been talking about this over the last couple of weeks here, but you have the FBI and the DHS. They are surging resources. HHS is freezing all child care payments to Minnesota. The House Oversight Committee is investigating because there were, of course, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in federal funds that were used. And yeah, the DOJ is looking into all of this as well. So you do have the fact that this has been going on for quite some time. It has now just come to the forefront of conversation really in the last several weeks within the mainstream media. Fox News had the Minnesota House Fraud Committee chair on. Her name is Kristen Robbins. And again, she is the Minnesota House of Representatives Fraud Committee chairman. And she is running against Tim Walz on the Republican ticket for the governorship of the fine state of Minnesota. She was on Fox News, and, she had a lot to say.
I think he has been derelict in his duties for 7 years. We warned him about these daycare fraud allegations last year. We did a full hearing on it in February, and they have done nothing since then. We gave them the list, similar to the list that we've seen go viral, and they haven't investigated them all, and they've done nothing. Even where there's clear signs and clear red flags, they haven't stopped payment. It is unconscionable.
It is unconscionable. What's also unconscionable, of course, is that the Democrats don't really seem to care. That's part of the frustration in all of this, is that the Democrats, including Abby Phillip on CNN, I don't know what in the world she's doing, but she is clearly in the wrong on a lot of these conversations. She was, and I've got all of this audio coming up, but, she was out there saying to Scott Jennings and basically anybody who has a problem with this, oh, why are you demonizing an entire Somali community if it's only, a handful of the total number of Somalis in either Minnesota or across the country? Well, there's reports out there that up to, and I've got a little bit on this coming up to 50% of the Somalis in Minneapolis, they are fraudulently here. So they may not all be partaking in the fraud as it relates to government funds and all of that and finances, but a whole lot of them seem to be, if the allegations are true, they are taking part in immigration fraud. If you want to say, oh, you're targeting Somalians, okay, well, it's because, where it is, they're here illegally. They are here because of fraudulent immigration practices. So, if that makes me and I'm going to air quote this, if that makes me a racist, well, then so be it. I don't care about being called a racist, do you? So remember, in Minnesota, they've had a total of 61 convictions so far, but the point is that Tim Walz stood by for a long time, and he did nothing. And even now, what she is saying is that they knew the fraud was going on. Yes, there were some convictions and some hearings there in the Minnesota state legislature, but they allowed all of these businesses to continue to operate, to continue to get money, whether we are talking about daycare centers, whether we are talking about transportation businesses, whether we are talking about healthcare facilities. They refused to stop the flow of money.
They've known about this. This has been on the radar of local journalists who did an investigative report on it. So for them to stand idly by for all these months and them continue to pay state taxpayer dollars to this organization is just terrible. And that's why we need a new governor. We just cannot have continuing to turn a blind eye and protect these fraudulent businesses.
Right. The numbers keep going up, $8 billion, $9 billion. Some are saying it's going to reach up to $18 billion maybe. And it's clearly really bad. And yes, they have finally, with the pressure, started to take some, and I mean some, action.
Belatedly, they're pausing payments and pausing enrolling new providers, but they've not shut anything down. They have not fired anyone. It is such unbelievable mismanagement of our tax dollars and of our programs that need vulnerable Minnesotans need.
Right. And, everybody's saying this, but, I talked about this at length last night, where you have all of these people, for example, veterans who would need access to this money. You take this $9 billion or this $10 billion, $18 billion, whatever it is, but you take that money and you actually give it to the people who could actually use it, like veterans who are afflicted with PTSD and addiction. Do you know how many veterans that could help, that $9, $10, $18 billion, whatever it is going to be? And so now we have other people just like Nick Shirley in states like Maine and Ohio and the state of Washington as well, knocking on doors of daycare centers, trying to find out where are the kids and is all of this fraudulent. And so we have not even come close to hearing the last of this story of Somali fraud, either in Minnesota or across the country. The phone number is 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Also coming up, if you were listening last night, I promised you that I was going to do a deep dive into all of the failures of one Gavin Newsom. Remember that there have been a couple of different polls out now and stories, and they're saying that Gavin Newsom has the momentum, right? Has the momentum going into 2028. I would have to ask the question regarding Gavin Newsom, and that is, what is that momentum based on? Because it is certainly not success. We've got all that and a whole lot more straight ahead. The text line is open that I use for my morning show in Nashville, Tennessee. So if you can't call in, text in 615-737-9986. Got a lot more straight ahead.
Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret.
Hi, I'm Jen Loomis, a transport safety expert at J.J. Keller. Once a roadside inspection is completed, the officer will close it out. If violations were discovered, most officers, as a courtesy, will explain the violations to the driver. If there were any out-of-service violations, the officer will normally explain what must be done to get the out-of-service order lifted. Drivers need to be very attentive during this part of the inspection. The driver also needs to read and understand the complete inspection report. The driver has 24 hours to get the roadside inspection report to the motor carrier. If the driver will not be returning to a company facility within the next 24 hours, the driver needs to know to get it on the way to you via email, mail, or fax within 24 hours. This tip was brought to you by J.J. Keller & Associates. Visit us at jjkeller.com.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
It's Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a little worried about the next 30 minutes of this radio broadcast. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I spent so much time going through all of the failures of one Gavin Newsom that I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit it all in the next 30 minutes of the program. That's how much failure is hanging over the head of Gavin Newsom over the past several years as he was the governor of California. And so I'm going to try to get through all of it. It's going to be, I'm just going to be honest with you, it's a pretty big bite. There's a lot of fraud there. There's a lot of failure there. But for, people like Mark Halpin and other folks who have been saying that Gavin Newsom has momentum heading into 2028, it really triggered me. Because I want to know what that momentum is based on. There's people out there that are literally saying that Gavin Newsom has momentum because he's good looking. Yeah, that's what, because it is the dumbest thing ever. We've got it all straight ahead on Red Eye Radio.
You're listening to Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios.
It's Red Eye Radio, 866-90 Red Eye is the phone number, 866-907-3339. My name is Dan Mandis, in for Gary and Eric. They do return after the first of the year. So does anybody really believe that Gavin Newsom have any momentum? Does he have momentum? So Mark Halperin wrote this big piece profiling the 2028 presidential candidates, talked a little bit about that last night. And one of the things that I just am curious about is how would Mark Halperin define momentum? And I'm not saying that Halperin is wrong, but I'm seeing all of these people talk about how Gavin Newsom is, the one for the Democrats heading into 2028, and how Gavin Newsom has all of this momentum. And I don't really understand it because, sure, I understand that Gavin Newsom is kind of glibby, but oftentimes a lot of the things that he says is complete and total BS.
I think Trump is one of the most destructive presidents and human beings in my lifetime.
All right, so there he is. One of the things I've noticed about Gavin Newsom is he has this very typical, usual, rapid, banter role where he starts flying with the talking points, right? But I want to play for you again what you actually heard just now one more time, because it is important, and words do mean things.
One of the most destructive presidents and human beings in my lifetime.
So Gavin Newsom, and I did talk about this on my Nashville show when he said this, but so Gavin Newsom is saying that Donald Trump is one of the most destructive human beings in his lifetime. So I just want you to think about that. You got Osama bin Laden, mastermind of 9/11. He and his fellow terrorists are responsible for the deaths of thousands of Americans. Gavin Newsom, is Donald Trump worse than Osama bin Laden? I'll wait. Saddam Hussein, of course, Iraq, killed almost 1 million people, including the Kurds. Bashar al-Assad, Syria, killed hundreds of thousands of people. What about serial killers? What about people like Charles Manson? You got the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. You got Ted Bundy as well. I mean, I could go on, but you get my point. Gavin Newsom says Donald Trump is one of the most destructive human beings in his lifetime. It's like, wow, dude. Do you actually listen to yourself?
I think this republic is at real risk, this country being unrecognizable.
Right. So, California is unrecognizable. And I can tell you from personal experience, you folks know, perhaps, that I'm from California. I grew up in California. I lived in California for a long time as an adult as well. And when I go back to California, it is unrecognizable. But when Gavin Newsom says that the United States is unrecognizable,
I think this republic is at real risk, this country being unrecognizable.
Well, part of the reason why this country is unrecognizable is because of the policies of people like you. Open border policies, sanctuary city and sanctuary state policies. Minneapolis, there are parts of Minneapolis that are unrecognizable. Why is that? It is because of your party, Gavin Newsom, not mine. Yours. Your party, you are the ones that invite the third world in and protect them at all costs. Just look at California, right? These days under Gavin Newsom's rule. Illegal immigration has spiked, thanks to the Democrats, of course. No border security of Biden under Joe Biden. But don't forget that sanctuary city and sanctuary state policies like those in California have been a big part of that story. That is why California is unrecognizable. So he can sit here and he can somehow blame Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump is making our nation unrecognizable. But it's actually the Democrats that are doing that. Gavin Newsom has championed policies that have wrecked our country, particularly illegal immigration.
This guy is reckless. He's wrecked this country. We'll not have a fair and free election if we don't continue to fight. I That's what matters to me, seriously. I'm the future ex-governor, and who the hell knows what happens the rest of my life.
So he's talking about Donald Trump again, obviously, who, by the way, spends so much time, Gavin Newsom spends so much time on Donald Trump. Trump is not running for a third term. So what's going to happen in November of 2028 when we end up having a free and fair election? And Donald Trump is going to go off and play golf at Mar-a-Lago. So Newsom, it's almost like what he's trying to do is he's trying to distract from his own failures by constantly talking about and demonizing Donald Trump. And so these rapid-fire talking points are so that nobody's going to ask him the real questions about the failures that he's had in California. I mean, he keeps saying this stuff, but the reality is they got their butts, the Democrats got their arses kicked by Donald Trump and by the Republicans. And again, you heard him say, we'll never have a free and fair election. Really? Well, for a guy who supports elections with no voter ID required, that is certainly a rich statement to make. And by the way, in some areas of California, did you know this? Illegal aliens can vote. In San Francisco and Oakland, illegal aliens can vote in local elections. Also in California, Gavin Newsom signed a bill into law that forbids or bans local governments from requiring voter ID at the polls. I'm a little confused. Because weren't the Democrats out there, including Gavin Newsom, weren't they out there saying, no kings, no kings, no kings? Well, doesn't that mean that whole process, that whole conversation of no kings, doesn't that mean that local governments should have the ability to do what they want? Like, for example, in California, Huntington Beach was talking about requiring ID to vote. And so Gavin Newsom signed that bill into law that forbid Huntington Beach or other local governments from requiring ID at the polls. Yet somehow Donald Trump is the authoritarian. And by the way, if you don't think that the Democrats won't do that at the national level, of course they will if they get the chance. And so now, I don't know if you saw this, but Gavin Newsom, he's put out this video heading into the new year, paving the way towards his announcement that he is running. And instead of talking about his failures, he keeps talking about Donald Trump.
We're dealing with an invasive species by the name of Donald Trump. He is an historic president, however. Historically unpopular president.
Ooh, burn. I saw this. And by the way, if you want to see the entire video, you can. It's on my X feed at Dan Mandis Show. But he's talking about how Donald Trump is so unpopular. You know that they tried to recall Gavin Newsom in California like 6 times? Now, one time, it actually made it to the ballot. It failed. But Gavin Newsom is no stranger to understanding how deeply, deeply unpopular a politician can be. Now, he has been able to revive, Gavin Newsom has been able to revive his numbers on the anti-Trump stuff that's been going on. But he's going to have to pivot at some point. I mean, it's really easy, and y'all know this. It is really easy to just say, well, the other guy is bad. But my question is this. What have you done, Gavin Newsom? In California, not much good and a lot of bad. So let's go through some bullet points. Homelessness. Gavin Newsom spent $37 billion, with a B, $37 billion to combat homelessness, and they got no results. Zip, zilch, zero, none. And they can't even account for the money. How do you lose $37 billion? NBC News with this headline, California's homeless crisis could be Gavin Newsom's political albatross. This is from the article. But if the situation does not improve before the primaries in 2028, Newsom may be forced to explain to a national audience why his state, with the 4th largest economy in the world, has the largest homeless population in the United States. Yet what does Gavin Newsom continue to do? Instead of answering the tough questions, he prattles on about Donald Trump.
Weakness masquerading as strength. That's Donald Trump.
Yeah, right, okay. Let's keep going. The high-speed rail project. In fairness, this does predate him, but Gavin Newsom actually made the situation worse. Now, this particular rail line was supposed to connect Los Angeles and San Francisco. So he gets into office. He scales the project back, making it basically useless. So instead of going between San Francisco and Los Angeles, basically it would be between Merced, California, and Bakersfield, which is like, you know, they're calling it a train to nowhere because while it's not exactly nowhere, it's not even close to what it was supposed to be. So why would they spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on a train that wasn't living up to what it was supposed to be and would basically be between two areas that it's not really needed per se? Costs and overruns continue through his 2 terms, and not one piece of track was laid. Billions of dollars wasted, yet Gavin Newsom talks about Donald Trump.
The rule of law, not the rule of Don.
Right. So it's funny that Gavin Newsom mentions the rule of law, because if you'd like to get into law and order, we can get into law and order in California under Gavin Newsom. He supported legislation reducing penalties for criminals in California, opposed tougher reforms for criminal behavior. You want to know what happened? You know what happened. You listen to Gary and Eric. You listen to talk radio. Crime skyrocketed. Violent crime up 13%. Now, Gavin Newsom and his apologists will tell you that crime is down. Most Californians who live in the state will tell you that crime is a major, major California issue. And by the way, California does remain above the national average in crime overall. Property crime, same thing. And here's the other thing. California's crime reporting data to the FBI, I checked on this, where the states, the stats come from the reporting data that the state does to the FBI. Well, California's data is incomplete, which means that a lot of these crimes are not being reported, which impacts the data. So when Gavin Newsom says, or some other people will say, crime in California is down, it's actually not. They're just not reporting the stats to the FBI. And that's under Gavin Newsom. But again, still, he talks about Donald Trump.
I don't believe in crowns, thrones, no kings.
So we talk about the $33 billion in unemployment fraud in California. That is a big thing. We've been talking about that. These fraudulent payments that went to, believe it or not, among other places, inmates in prison. Unemployment fraud in California. Poor oversight, delayed responses, corruption. You know, it's so bad that we don't even know how much money was lost in the state of California. And so in the midst of all of this insanity in Minnesota, the state auditor in California said that California is actually far worse. That, my friends, is what's going on in California under Gavin Newsom. So why exactly is it that he continues to prattle on about Donald Trump when he's got all of these other things that he's got to answer for, and he's got some explaining to do? Gavin Newsom, once people start focusing on the issues and not on his, supposed great smile or good looks or whatever it is, and they start focusing on what he's done to California, things are going to be a lot different. We'll have to see where all of that so-called momentum goes after the real conversation begins. 866-90-RED-EYE will return next.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
Red Eye Radio, 86690 Red Eye, and you can always follow me on X at Dan Mandis Show. Follow me on Facebook as well. And I love X for so many different reasons. One of the biggest reasons is because I get to hear from people like you who send me cool stuff. Like, for example, let's see here. Let's Go Pitt sent me a note on X, and he's talking about some of the other failures of Gavin Newsom that I didn't even have the time to get to. I told you before I was a little worried about not being able to fit my entire segment into the allotted time talking about all of the failures of Gavin Newsom. Didn't get to all of them. And Let's Go Pitt called me out. He's got a couple of others. I'll talk about that. And by the way, one of my favorite stories of 2025 is coming up next, right here on Red Eye Radio.
Top of the Hour News is brought to you by House Products. Visit houseproducts.com.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One. Now, it's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis, this is Red Eye Radio.
86690 Red Eye is the phone number. Thank you for tuning in. 86690 Red Eye. It is a New Year's Eve morning. And a little programming note, tomorrow, New Year's Day, we are running tape, whatever it is, but then I'll be back on Friday, and then Gary and Eric return on Monday as the new year comes in. So always looking forward to the boys coming back. And if you want to chime in, if you don't want to call in, you can text in 615-737-9986. So let me ask you this question about Ilhan Omar. Because, you know, Somalians, if you listen to the left, the Somalis, they're under attack by the white supremacist Republicans. Here's the deal. Is that, and I'm not going to go on and on about the Somalians per se, the fraud in this segment. But the Daily Mail has an incredible article on Ilhan Omar and her ties to something called the Hargeisa Holocaust. Now, they've done an investigation into the real story behind Ilhan Omar. Now, if you're new to talk radio, whatever, she is the congresswoman out of Minneapolis, and she is Somalian. She's always said that her family came here as victims of the civil war going on in Somalia way back in the 80s. She's been here for a long time. She came from Somalia. This is how the story goes. Her family escaped the civil war in Somalia. Horrible things were going on. She ended up in Virginia, then ultimately settling in Minnesota, and she was part of this huge crush of people that came to the Minneapolis area, Somalians. And so then that, of course, led to all of the fraud that we are seeing today. But as a Somalian, she was voted into office representing this heavily Somali district. Now, investigations are now looking at everything that she has said about the circumstances of her leaving Somalia and her family leaving Somalia. And it appears that she may have been lying about her family's history. Again, we've always heard that she came here as a child of war and escaping that war, escaping Somalia, painting her family as victims. But it turns out her father may have actually been part of the regime of a murderous, brutal dictator. That's right. Guy's name apparently was Nur Omar Mohammed. She called her father an educator in her book, but it turns out he was an officer in the Somalian National Army, stationed in regions where tens of thousands of Somalians were massacred by the nation's army. It's civil war. Her memoir from 2020 downplays any ties to Somalia's former military regime and instead, again, says that her father was a civilian professional caught up in the civil war and forced them to flee Somalia. But Daily Mail, and by the way, the Daily Mail is out of the UK. This is a great news organization. They do incredible work. Now, I want you to think about this and put it in this perspective. A lot of the people that have gone to Minnesota from Somalia, and we're all talking about this, well, they've lied about who they are. They've lied about the reason why they came to America. We don't know who they're married to. We don't know what their real names are. We don't know if they're marrying relatives. We don't know how much immigration fraud there is. But what we do know is there's a lot. And so the story of Ilhan Omar, it is very consistent with what we're seeing in Minnesota. So according to multiple scholars and retired generals contacted by the Daily Mail in Somalia, Ilhan Omar's father was not an educator. No, he was actually a higher up in the military of Mohammed Saeed Barre. And I'm probably saying the guy's name wrong, but it doesn't matter. But he was the head of the government military that killed thousands. And Omar's dad, we're now being told, was a part of that military, a big part of that murderous dictatorship. Not an educator, but a part of a murderous dictatorship. So what actually is the background of Ilhan Omar? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that she's been lying, would you? Of course not. But what happened in this war? What happened to the people of Somalia at the hands of this murderous dictatorship that Ilhan Omar's father was allegedly part of? Women were raped. Men were murdered. Wells were poisoned for the communities. Livestock were slaughtered. And aerial bombardments reduced neighborhoods to rubble. Now, all of this was in the 1980s. When that regime fell, as the story goes, according to the Daily Mail, the family was able to escape using, wait for it, different names, eventually settling in Minnesota. You know, there's even video of Ilhan Omar's dad in a meeting talking about destroying towns and murdering people? Yeah. So now a few more things. Apparently, DHS cannot actually find her father's naturalization paperwork, which means that, yeah, it may have been fraudulent. The whole family coming to America may have been based on fraudulent terms. Even Snopes has said there has been nothing verified. The other question about Ilhan Omar marrying her brother so he could come into the country also persists. And so Tom Homan is out there. This was from a few weeks ago, I believe. Tom Homan says he is looking specifically on if she actually married his brother so that her brother could come into America.
You know, I just got advised by a fraud investigator the other day on that. I asked the question, who reviewed the file and says that there was immigration fraud involved. The statute of limitations became an issue in the last 4 years when this was first brought up. Who was president? Who ran DOJ? So pulling the records now, pulling the files, and we're looking at, but this fraud investigator, who I know personally, one of the best fraud investigators in HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, said there's no doubt he reviewed the file. So I'm running that down this week, matter of fact, and we'll see.
So, well, we haven't heard anything yet. Again, that was a few weeks ago, and so everybody is waiting to find out what is going on with the supposedly marriage of Ilhan Omar and her brother so that her brother could come into America. But what happens if they can't, just going back to the previous topic, what happens if they can't find the naturalization papers of Ilhan Omar's father? Well, does that mean that they can, effectively denaturalize Ilhan Omar and deport her? I don't know. But what I do know is that she has said multiple times that her first love, her first priority is Somalia and the people in Somalia. So if that's her priority, then, I mean, the obvious thing to say is she can go back to Somalia. There's even some audio out there where she is saying that it is her dream to go back and live in Somalia. I mean, there's a pretty easy way to do that, Ilhan. Very easy way indeed. Also, a lot of people asking the question, how did she go from, broke to a millionaire several times over, many times over, in just the few terms that she's been in the House of Representatives? How did that happen? So there's a lot of questions here. The other thing that we've learned, of course, is that there is, as I mentioned before, massive immigration fraud going on right now in the state of Minnesota within the Somali community. Will people actually be held accountable, and will they actually be deported? This is what Tom Homan said.
Absolutely. I mean, those days are over. Thank God President Trump's in the White House. We're going to look at all of them. I mean, we're going to look at those here illegally, of course. We're going to look at those here under a visa or some sort of, immigration process that are criminals. We're going to look at the national security threats. But those who came through a process that weren't properly vetted, who didn't provide documentation, who slipped through the Biden's weak processes on, giving visas and temporary, whether student visas or visitors visas or whatever. We're going the whole gamut. President Trump has instructed us go down and we're going to deep dive all of this. And we're going to hold people accountable. So yes, there are going to be multiple deportations coming. Absolutely.
No, so, and listen, you always have people on the left. Is this what you voted for? Heck yeah, this is what I voted for. Absolutely. People here illegally, fraudulently, ripping off the government. Really? You don't want that? That's what I would ask people. You don't want people like that deported? I mean, I would have to ask the very legit question, why would you not want those people deported? I mean, that's the crazy thing. People, and trust me, I'm a talk radio, I'm a talk show host. I know this. This happens to me all the time. Where people will say, oh, but Donald Trump, he's deporting so many people. Okay, well, let's look at some of the folks that he is deporting or the people that I want deported. And that is people that are here fraudulently, breaking the laws and so forth. Yeah, their butts got to get out of here. Absolutely. I have no issue with that whatsoever. Now, haven't heard anything from Tom Homan as far as this investigation into Omar marrying her brother. But I'm here to tell you that the Daily Mail does do very good investigative work. And so if they have, gone to Somalia, or wherever these, retired generals and so forth are, and if they're saying that, yes, Ilhan Omar's father was actually a higher up in a murderous Somali regime that was killing a whole bunch of innocent people in Somalia as part of this civil war, and not an educator like she claims, that is something that people need to know about. Now, the problem, of course, we face is that nobody would care. Nobody would care in her community of Somalia Soda, which is what I call her district in Minnesota. Nobody would care. Why wouldn't they care? Because a lot of those people have done the same thing to get into America, not telling the truth about who they are or the circumstances with which they came or how they are getting their money. 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. You could text me anytime during the show tonight, and that text line is 615-737-9986. Got a lot more straight ahead, including, I cannot wait to tell you this, the epidemic of whiteness is apparently triggering liberals across America. The Whiteness Pandemic is straight ahead right here on Red Eye Radio.
This morning's USDA Farm Report is brought to you by House Products. Tested, trusted, guaranteed since 1920.
Much of the nation was only dreaming of a white Christmas during Christmas week. In fact,
it was pretty amazing when you look at the average temperatures that were more than 20 degrees above average all the way from the Intermountain West into the Mid-South, extending southward through the southern Great Plains.
Truly remarkable, according to USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey, for any 7-day period, any time of year, let alone Christmas week. Several communities during the week of December 21st through 28th reported all-time record-high temperatures for this time of year.
And so that kicked off December 22nd.
Topping with well above 80-degree Fahrenheit high temperatures in locales such as Tucson, Arizona, and Lubbock, Texas. Multiple communities from the Pacific Coast to the Southeast, well over 100, says Brad Rippey, with record-high temperatures recorded this past Christmas Day. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This report brought to you by Cenex Fuels and Lubes.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE. I'm sorry. 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone. I'm laughing at some of the things that are going on social media regarding the Somali fraud. You know what? And I feel like I'm focusing on this one story way too much. But I got to tell you that there's so many different angles to this. There's the media angle as far as, Nick Shirley doing the jobs of CNN and MSNBC and the networks who, they either didn't cover it or they covered it barely, if you know what I mean, to the actual fraud, to the fact now that you still have people on the left, like Abby Phillip, for example, that she's still trying to say. And Tim Walz, of course, the governor for the state of Minnesota, also saying that it is white supremacy in action if you are calling out the Somali fraud. So Scott Jennings put this out. Let me repost this real quick. I don't know if I may have already reposted this, but this is Scott Jennings, and he is pointing out the fact that his cohorts on the Abby Phillip show were saying, we never said, or Democrats never said, or Tim Walz never said that it is white supremacy in action if you are calling out the Somali fraud. Listen to this.
It's Democrats who have put Somali diaspora in Minneapolis at the center of their party and their state's politics. It's a small portion of the population. There is a bunch of fraud that goes on. And even Tim Walz has claimed that any investigation of this fraud is akin to white supremacy.
No,
which is
he
a
hasn't. No, he has not claimed that.
He
has not said
He
that.
has said that.
So all of these, cackling leftists on the panel is, no, he didn't say that. No, he actually did. And so what Scott Jennings did is he then, of course, does what he should do, which is edit in the audio of Tim Walz saying
that.
This is what happens when your own federal government wages war against you. This is what happens when they target communities for their own benefit. This is what happens when they scapegoat. And this is what happens when they no longer hide the idea of white supremacy, the idea of white supremacy, the idea of white supremacy, the idea of white supremacy.
Exactly. So I love that Scott Jennings did that, because it is just so absolutely ridiculous. And it's what they do. We all know this. It's what the left does. When you're losing an argument, you name call, right? That's what they do. But there's also another trend that is going on social media where Somalis are now basically trolling the American people. I reposted this to my X feed. I posted a lot tonight. And this is a guy from Somalia, and he's telling the American people that what's going on in Minneapolis is none of your business. Listen to this. This is a Somalian in Minnesota.
Somalian people in Minneapolis is not your problem. Your problem is you. You have issue within yourself. You have to fix yourself first.
Really?
Minnesota Somalian is not the issue of your life. You got to go take care of yourself and your family. You got to pay your bills.
Well, I'd like to pay my bills, but I'm busy paying your bills. There's another video, and I'm trying to clean it up, where a guy is in, it looks like he's in a Home Depot or a Lowe's or something like that. And there's a couple of Somali guys there as well. And there's a lot of cursing in it, so I can't really air it without it. Just too much cursing. But the problem is that in the scene, and you can find it on my X feed, is that this guy is telling them, giving them what for, because they're out there trolling him and saying, yeah, but do you have this? And they're holding a bunch of money. They're trolling this guy because they've got all of this money that they have gotten more than likely through fraud, and they're trolling the guy with it. So not only are they frauds, but they're trolling the American people, which isn't going to help anything.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
Phone number is 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Phone lines are open. If you don't want to call in, you can text in 615-737-9986, 615-737-9986. By the way, I am in for Gary and Eric. They return next year after the first of the year. And if you want to follow me on the socials at Dan Mandis Show, I host a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. And we have not only the podcast there at the website, 997WTN.com, but you can also find all my shows on YouTube as well. Have you heard of the Whiteness Pandemic? I mean, look, since I'm already race baiting here, talking about the Somalis, I might as well just go full on race baiting. Looking back on 2025, on this final show of the year, one of the most absolutely ridiculous topics that I covered was this notion of a whiteness pandemic. Yes, somehow the color of one's skin is now considered a pandemic amongst the people on the left. Now, this was a piece of audio from an egghead college professor out of, wait for it, Minnesota, of course, and her name is Gail Ferguson.
We posit that there is a whiteness pandemic behind the racism pandemic, and that this begins in the family system where young children are socialized into the culture of whiteness within white families.
So what exactly would you call then the culture of whiteness or the culture of white families? What would you call that? This is an article from Fox News. Whiteness refers to culture, not biology. The centuries-old culture of whiteness features color blindness, passivity, and white fragility, is what these leftists say, which are all covert expressions of racism common in the United States. That is from Fox News, quoting the university. It's not biology. It is actually the centuries-old culture of whiteness. Again, featuring color blindness, passivity, and, as they say, white fragility. You know, one thing about that white fragility, can I just focus on that for 30 seconds, please? When white folks would cower at being called a racist, that's what I would call white fragility. Those days are over. I don't know too many white folks, at least on my side of the aisle, if you will, that cower at being called a racist anymore. The whole concept of white fragility on the right is no longer there. Now, if you want to talk about, white fragility on the left, i.e. people like Tim Walz, well, I believe that perhaps still exists. Now, there's other definitions of white fragility. I'm being a little broad with how I'm utilizing the term white fragility. But do you consider yourself, someone who has this white fragility? I certainly do not. I stopped worrying about being called a racist years ago. And this whole notion of a whiteness pandemic that leads to a racism pandemic is just a bunch of egghead BS. And do you know what the great thing is about 2025 and heading into 2026? Most folks don't care on our side about the notion of white fragility. I know a lot of you folks don't. I mean, somebody calls me a racist, I already know that they are actually the ones that are racist. Here's more. Naming the whiteness pandemic shifts our gaze, they say, from the victims and effects of racism onto the systems that perpetuate racism, starting with the family system. They say, at birth, young children growing up in white families begin to be socialized into the culture of whiteness, making the family system one of the most powerful systems involved in systemic racism. All right, so if I'm following all of this, then white families are what is causing this culture of whiteness, and that is what brings in this notion of systemic racism. If I'm following all of this correctly, so I grokked, what is the culture of whiteness or white American families? Because I'm genuinely curious what Grok would say about, the culture of white American families. You ready? Part of the culture of white American families is, according to Grok, individualism and independence with an emphasis on personal achievement. Is that wrong? Because it seems to me like if I am independent and I do have an emphasis on personal achievement, doesn't that mean that I'm not going to be beholden to my government to help me raise my family or help me keep a roof over my head? You're damn right it does. And that is the exact opposite of what progressives and liberals and Democrats want. Democrats want you to be beholden to the government, to be dependent on the government, because then they can control you. So if one of the notions of this culture of white American families or whiteness is individualism and independence and an emphasis on personal achievement, sign me up. They say self-reliance in children becoming autonomous adults, example, moving out at 18, nuclear families, parents and children, are common, with extended family living separately. Elderly parents often prefer independent living over multi-generational households, they say, unlike some Asian, Hispanic, or black families. So I'm not exactly sure how this is supposed to be bad. Now, if Asian and Hispanic and black families, if they want to, have all of the generations live under one roof, that's fine too. But being autonomous or independent is not a bad thing, unless, of course, you're a Democrat, clearly. Somehow, in their clearly misguided minds, being responsible adults is now somehow racist. I mean, does that make sense to you? Because it doesn't make sense to me. Moving on. Family structure. And remember, if you're just joining us, the left is now saying there is an epidemic of whiteness in America, and that whiteness is now leading to an epidemic of racism. I mean, this is part of, what was in the news in 2025, and this was a story a few weeks ago. Family structure. Because I grokked, okay, what is part of the culture of whiteness? Well, family structure is part of the culture of whiteness. Traditionally, a nuclear unit with married parents. Again, somehow that is leading to racism. Again, not racist. A positive family environment with married parents is better for children. I mean, you can agree with me, and that's great. If you don't agree, that's fine too. And that's not to say that single parents cannot do amazing things. I've known a lot of single parents who have done amazing things. You could also say that bad marriages where warring parents, damage kids, that can also be part of the discussion. But don't sit here and tell me that a nuclear unit with happily married parents raising their children to be independent with an emphasis on personal achievement is racist, because it's not. Only in the progressive, riddled mind of a Democrat does that make sense, that all of that stuff is racist. It's not. Now, this one might be a little controversial. Racial socialization. White families discuss race less explicitly than minority families, often adopting colorblind approaches, teaching that race doesn't matter, or relying on diverse environments for exposure. Now, this differs from more direct preparation for bias in non-white families. So basically what they're saying is that in white families, we follow the tenets of Martin Luther King Jr., right? Judge people based on the content of their character and not on the color of their skin. So this is where the confusion lies, because for, years, I grew up in a divorced family, but, my dad was involved. My mom had us and whatever. But, they always told me that you're supposed to treat everybody equally. That's what we were told. But now somehow it's racist. Now, are we supposed to care about the fragility of Democrats who say that now we're supposed to treat people of color differently? Completely reversing what we were all told for generations? Now, I'm going to tell you that I don't care what the progressives tell me. I'm going to treat everyone differently. I'm going to treat everyone the same. I'm not going to treat people differently based on the color of their skin. I'm simply not. I still believe in treating everyone with respect regardless of their skin color. And somehow people believe that that is racist. Doesn't make any sense.
Families. Our first recommendation is to remember that the whiteness pandemic is a pandemic. If you are born and raised in the United States, especially in a white family, then you've been raised in the pandemic, and you can play a role in halting and reversing this pandemic.
All right, so I will tell this woman that you can bite my white behind. Yeah. You see, in America, I have the right not to care about your constant need for victim status. And again, in case you're wondering who that is, if you're just joining us, that is a professor out of Minnesota who is trying to say that there is this epidemic of whiteness in America that is leading to this epidemic of racism in America. And you know what? If you want to live in a world of victim status and celebrating victims, you go right on ahead. If that's where you want to live, knock yourself out. You have a right to say that if you want. But I have an equal right to ignore you. You know, this constant white people are bad BS, it is meant to divide us, to foment anger and division, because that is where the Democrat Party lives, and that is where the Democrat Party thrives. You know why? Because their policies are terrible. And so they have to keep going back to this well of racism and division. Now, listen to the rest of this. This is, oh my goodness, so funny.
We have two specific recommendations to that end. The first is for white parents to invest time in their own racial identity development through joining an organization like Showing Up for Racial Justice or your local BLM chapter.
Wow. Hey, let's go join an organization like Black Lives Matter, white people. Really? That's insanity. because Black Lives Matter is so incredibly corrupt, and I will ask this question, and I've been asking this for a long time. Name me one black person that has had their lives improved by Black Lives Matter, besides the corrupt leaders who stole millions of dollars, bought massive mansions with all of that corruption. So no, I will not be joining Black Lives Matter or any other organization that wants to divide our country and not bring us together. So this insanity of this, this scourge, this, plague of whiteness across America leading to racism, this is very simply put the Democrats trying to get us to ignore their massive failures. I don't believe that it's going to work. As a matter of fact, I believe that that stuff like this actually unites the right more than it divides us. Got a lot more straight ahead.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
It is Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. My name is Dan Mandis, in for Gary and Eric. We've got tomorrow off, New Year's Day off, and then we are back on Friday live. It'll be my last day filling in for Gary and Eric. They then return on, after the first of the year, so looking forward to their return. You can follow me on the socials at Dan Mandis Show. Coming up, so is the economy good or not? Are we doing okay as a nation or not? Because the left is trying to tell us that we're, still going to end up in a recession in 2026. So we've got an update on your money and a whole lot more straight ahead. It is Red Eye Radio.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.